Eli was 15 years old, but the land had already taught him lessons most adults never learned. He lived with his grandfather, Amos, on a quiet ranch stretched across open plains, where the sky felt too big and the wind never truly slept. Eli's parents had died years earlier, and since then the ranch had become more than a home. It was memory, responsibility, and survival wrapped into one. Every morning began before sunrise, with the sound of horses shifting in their stalls and the creak of the old barn complaining about age. That afternoon began like many others, but something in the air felt wrong. The sky was not just cloudy. It was heavy, layered in thick gray sheets that pressed down on the land. Eli noticed it first while brushing one of the horses. The animal kept flicking its ears and stamping nervously, as if listening to something far away. Eli followed its gaze toward the horizon and felt a strange tightness in his chest. The wind had stopped completely, leaving behind a silence that felt louder than noise. Amos stepped out of the house slowly, his joints stiff but his eyes alert. He stood still for a long moment, studying the sky the way a reader studies a familiar page. Amos had lived through more winters than Eli could count. He didn't trust calm skies that came without warmth. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady. "Storm's coming," he said. Not loudly, not urgently.
"Just certain."
Eli asked how bad it would be, but Amos didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched the horses. Animals knew things humans didn't. When they began circling and snorting, Amos nodded to himself. "Bad enough," he said. "We don't have much time." The barn was old, held together by stubbornness and repeated repairs. Amos knew it wouldn't survive a full blizzard. The wind would rip through the gaps. The roof would struggle under heavy snow, and the horses would panic. Losing them wasn't an option. They were more than animals. They were the ranch's heartbeat. Without wasting time, Amos walked into the tool shed and returned carrying 2 shovels. He handed one to Eli. The metal was cold against Eli's palms. "We dig," Amos said. Eli didn't argue. He trusted his grandfather completely. They walked toward the hillside behind the barn, a slope Amos had chosen years ago as a place of last resort. The soil there was dense and firm, packed tight by decades of pressure. If shaped correctly, it could shield them from wind and cold. The first strike of the shovel sent a shock through Eli's arms. The ground was already frozen near the surface, resisting every movement. Each scoop came up heavy and stubborn. Eli's breath formed clouds in the air as he worked, his muscles burning quickly. Amos worked beside him, slower but consistent, never rushing, never stopping. Snow began to fall lightly, small flakes drifting down like warnings. Eli glanced at the sky, feeling time slip away. The hole grew wider and deeper, just enough to hint at shelter. Amos explained quietly as they worked, telling Eli where to cut, how to angle the walls, how to let the earth support itself instead of collapsing. As the snow thickened, the wind returned, sharper now, cutting through Eli's jacket. His fingers went numb, but he kept digging. He thought about the horses, about how scared they looked, and that thought pushed him forward. Soon the snowfall turned aggressive. Flakes came faster, driven sideways by rising wind. The world around them began to fade, shapes blurring into white. Eli felt panic creeping in, but Amos's presence grounded him. His grandfather counted breaths out loud, steady and calm, giving Eli something to follow. After what felt like hours, the hole was finally large enough. It wasn't perfect. The walls were rough, uneven, but solid. Amos nodded once. "That'll hold," he said. Getting the horses inside was another challenge. The animals resisted at first, confused by the narrow entrance and the strange smell of freshly cut earth. Eli spoke softly to them, guiding each one forward. Amos moved slowly, never forcing, letting the horses decide to trust. One by one, they stepped inside, hooves scraping against packed dirt. Inside the shelter, the wind disappeared almost completely. The temperature felt different too, less cruel. The horses crowded together, their bodies radiating warmth. Eli felt a wave of relief wash over him. Outside, the blizzard fully arrived. The wind howled like a living thing, slamming into the hillside with violent force. Snow piled up quickly, covering the entrance faster than Eli expected. Amos directed him to pack snow carefully, shaping it into a protective barrier while leaving a small opening for air. Eli worked fast, his arms trembling with exhaustion. The storm erased everything familiar. The barn vanished behind a wall of white. The fence disappeared. Even the sky and ground blended together. Eli realized how small they were against nature. And for the first time he truly understood what survival meant. When they finally sealed the shelter, Eli collapsed onto the cold ground, breathing hard. His hands were raw, his shoulders aching. Amos sat beside him, calm as ever. The old man placed a hand on Eli's shoulder, steady and reassuring. They sat in silence as the storm raged outside. The sound was overwhelming, a constant roar that pressed against Eli's ears. Snow creaked and shifted above them, but the earth held firm. Eli watched the horses carefully, afraid they might panic. Instead, they gradually settled, trusting the shelter and the humans beside them. One horse leaned close to Eli, its warm breath fogging the air. Eli rested his head against its neck, feeling its heartbeat. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into something endless. Eli thought about his parents, about how they used to watch storms together through the window. He wondered if they would be proud of him now. The thought gave him strength. Amos finally spoke again, his voice nearly swallowed by the wind. "Remember this," he said. "Land always gives warnings. You just have to listen." Eli nodded, even though his throat was tight. He understood now. The sky, the animals, the silence before the storm, they had all spoken. As the blizzard continued to rage, Eli felt fear, exhaustion, and determination mix into something new, something stronger. He realized that this moment, this hole in the ground, this storm trying to bury them was changing him. He wasn't just surviving. He was learning how. The blizzard did not slow after they sealed the shelter. Instead, it grew angrier, as if offended by their refusal to surrender. Wind slammed into the hillside over and over, sending vibrations through the packed earth. Snow shifted and pressed down from above, making low groaning sounds that echoed through the small space. Eli felt every sound in his bones. He sat close to the horses, knees drawn up, his back pressed against the cold wall, trying to make himself as small and steady as possible. Amos remained alert. He leaned forward slightly, listening the way hunters listened for movement. His eyes moved constantly, checking the snow wall, the air opening, the horses. Eli noticed how little his grandfather spoke now. Words wasted energy. Every breath mattered. Eli followed his example, slowing his breathing, focusing on staying calm even as fear crept in like cold water. The air inside the shelter was thick with warmth from the horses' bodies. Steam rose from their coats and hung in the dim space. Eli pulled his jacket tighter, feeling sweat freeze against his skin whenever he stopped moving. He shifted carefully, making sure not to startle the animals. A frightened horse could be dangerous in such a tight space. Hours passed, though Eli could not tell how many. The storm outside never rested. Snow scratched and scraped against the shelter's outer wall, trying to find a weak point. Once, a sudden heavy thud made Eli flinch hard. His heart raced as he imagined the roof collapsing. He looked at Amos, panic ready to spill over. But his grandfather only raised a finger, signaling him to listen. The sound passed. The shelter held. Eli swallowed hard and forced his breathing to slow. He realized then that fear fed on imagination. Amos had taught him that too, though never in such extreme conditions. Survival was as much about controlling the mind as protecting the body. The horses shifted, hooves scraping softly against the dirt. One snorted nervously and another stamped, sending vibrations through the ground. Eli reached out slowly, placing a hand against Willow's shoulder. Her warmth was immediate, grounding. He whispered her name under his breath, steady and low. Gradually the animals settled again, trusting the shelter and the humans beside them. Cold crept in slowly, quietly. It started in Eli's toes, a dull numbness that spread upward. He flexed his feet repeatedly, wiggling his fingers inside his gloves. Amos noticed and motioned for him to move closer to the horses. They shared heat without words. Bodies pressed near, conserving warmth. At some point, hunger announced itself. Eli's stomach twisted painfully. He hadn't eaten since morning. Amos reached into his coat and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside were a few pieces of dried bread and a handful of grain, meant for emergencies. He divided it carefully, giving more to the horses, less to themselves. Eli didn't complain. Hunger was uncomfortable, but weakness was dangerous. They ate slowly, chewing each bite until it almost disappeared. Eli had never tasted food like that before. Every bite felt important. Every swallow felt like strength returning. The storm showed no mercy as night fell. Darkness pressed in heavy and complete. Without light, sounds grew louder. The wind's howl deepened, changing pitch again and again. Snow shifted above them constantly, reminding Eli that tons of weight rested on the shelter. Sleep felt impossible. Eli dozed in short, broken moments, his head jerking up at every noise. Each time Amos was awake, His grandfather's eyes reflected faint light from the snow wall, calm and steady. That calm did more for Eli than words ever could. At one point, Eli whispered, "What if it doesn't stop?" Amos didn't answer right away. He waited until the wind dropped slightly, just enough to make his voice clear. "Storms always stop," he said. "Question is whether you're ready when they do." Eli nodded, though Amos couldn't see it. He understood. Panic would only make the storm stronger in their minds. Preparation was their shield. Sometime deep into the night, the wind changed. It didn't die, but it lost its sharp edge. The howling softened into something tired. Snow still fell, but with less fury. Eli noticed before Amos said anything. Hope flickered carefully inside him, fragile but real. They didn't rush. Amos insisted on waiting. Many people died after storms by assuming danger had passed too soon. They stayed where they were, listening, feeling the ground above them settle. By early morning, light began to filter faintly through the packed snow at the entrance. It wasn't bright, but it was different. The storm's voice had faded to a whisper. Amos finally nodded. "We dig out," he said. Eli's muscles protested the moment he picked up the shovel again. Every movement hurt. His hands felt stiff and clumsy. Still, he worked carefully, pushing snow away bit by bit. Amos worked beside him, matching pace, watching the structure closely. Snow poured in as they opened the entrance, blinding and cold. Eli blinked hard, coughing as fresh air rushed in. The light grew stronger with every scoop. Finally, the opening widened enough for them to step out. The world beyond the shelter was unrecognizable. Snow covered everything in smooth, endless waves. The barn was nothing but a white shape barely rising from the ground. Fence posts poked out like broken fingers. The sky was pale and quiet, emptied of anger. Eli stepped out fully, his legs shaking. He turned back toward the shelter as the horses emerged one by one, alive and steady. Relief hit him so hard it made him dizzy. He laughed without realizing it, the sound breaking free after hours of silence. Amos stepped out last. He stood for a moment, surveying the land, then placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. There was pride in that touch, deep and unspoken. They had survived, not by strength alone, but by trust, patience, and the wisdom carved into the land itself. The silence after the storm felt unreal. Eli stood ankle-deep in snow, turning slowly, trying to recognize the world he had known his entire life. Everything looked softer, smoother, almost gentle, as if the blizzard had erased its own violence overnight. But the damage was there, hidden beneath the calm. The barn roof sagged under the weight of snow. Fences lay buried or snapped. Paths had vanished completely. The land looked peaceful yet fragile. Amos moved carefully, testing each step, his experience guiding him even now. "Storm's gone," he said quietly, "but winter's not finished." Eli understood what he meant. Surviving the blizzard was only the beginning. Now came the work that decided whether survival lasted. The horses stood close together, steam rising from their bodies. Eli checked each one the way Amos had taught him, eyes, legs, breathing. No injuries, no frostbite. They were shaken but strong. Relief settled deeper into Eli's chest, heavier and warmer than anything he had felt before. These animals were alive because they had acted in time. They began clearing a path first, digging slowly toward the barn. Every shovel of snow felt heavier than the last. Eli's body protested, muscles stiff and sore, but his mind felt clear. There was no panic now, only focus. Amos worked beside him, occasionally correcting his angle or pace, still teaching even after everything they had endured. Hours passed before they reached the barn door. It opened with effort, snow tumbling inside. The structure had survived barely. Inside, everything was cold and still, but intact enough to use. Amos nodded once, satisfied. "Good enough," he said. On the ranch, that phrase meant success. They moved the horses carefully, one by one, guiding them back into familiar space. The animals seemed calmer now, reassured by routine. Eli watched them settle, a deep sense of responsibility washing over him. He realized something important in that moment. These lives depended on him now more than ever. As the day went on, neighbors began to appear, moving slowly across the snow on foot or horseback. News traveled fast after storms. Some had lost animals. Some had lost buildings. A few had nearly lost people. When they saw Eli and Amos standing, alive, with all their horses safe, disbelief crossed their faces. "How'd you manage?" one man asked, shaking his head. Amos glanced at Eli before answering. "We listened," he said simply. Eli didn't explain further, but inside he knew exactly what Amos meant. They had listened to the land, to the sky, to the animals, and to each other. Most people only listened once disaster arrived. By then it was often too late. That night, exhaustion finally claimed Eli. He slept deeper than he ever had. Dreams filled with wind and snow, slowly fading into quiet. When he woke, morning light spilled through the window, gentle and pale. For a moment, everything felt normal again. Days turned into weeks. Repairs continued. Life slowly stitched itself back together. Eli noticed that Amos tired more easily now. The storm had taken something out of him. Something invisible but real. Eli began taking on more responsibility without being asked. Feeding the horses, fixing fences, watching the sky. One evening as they sat together near the fire, Amos spoke softly. "That storm changed you?" Eli nodded. "It changed us." Amos smiled, a small, tired smile. "That's how it works." Years passed. The ranch remained, shaped by storms and seasons, but strong. Amos eventually left the harder work to Eli entirely. When he passed, it was peaceful, surrounded by the land he loved. Eli buried him on the hillside, the same one that had saved them long ago. Eli grew into a man known for calm judgment. People came to him for advice before winter storms, before hard decisions. He never claimed bravery. He talked about preparation, about patience, about knowing when to dig instead of run. Sometimes during heavy snowfall, Eli walked to the old hillside. The shelter had long collapsed, returned fully to the earth. Only he remembered exactly where it had been. He would stand there quietly, listening to the wind, feeling the land beneath his boots. The blizzard became a story he told sparingly, not for praise, but as a reminder. Nature did not need to be conquered. It needed to be understood. And whenever the sky darkened and the air grew strangely silent, Eli would smile faintly, pick up his shovel and begin.